replaced the Stamp Act in 1776, it pretty much maintained that, well, maybe you got away with this one, guys. Maybe you got us to repeal the Stamp Act, but just a reminder, here's an act that says we can tax you whenever we want. It's pretty much saying Parliament's authority was identical in both Britain and North America. The Townshend Acts were a revenue plan passed by the Parliament in 1767 and imposed harsher taxes on the purveyors of imported goods such as glass, paper, and tea. In addition, a special board of customs officials was appointed to enforce writs of assistance, and that was, again, repealed in 1770 after more of these protests that we talked about, led by the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, tar and feathering, burning in effigy, attacking various big public buildings. Like, people were not happy about it. So, authorized under the Townshend Act, writs of assistance allowed customs officials to search colonial homes, businesses, and warehouses for smuggled goods without a warrant from a judge. Not good. Led to the Massachusetts Circular Letter demanding, of course, the Townshend Acts be repealed. It demanded that the Townshend Act, the Massachusetts Circular Letter, it rejuvenated the boycott of British goods and the homespun movement of people just trying to make their own things and bypass the need for British taxes. And this kind of rebellion really led to the Boston Massacre. It was a landmark incident in March 5th, 1770, that helped alienate the American people from Parliament and King George. Angered by the Quartering Act, a crowd of Bostonians harassed the British troops guarding a local customs house. The guards then fired upon the crowd, killing 5 and wounding 6 protesters. John Adams would defend the guards tried for this incident and secure their acquittal. So they got off on that. And the thing is, John Adams, he was no friend of the British rule. He was one of the founding fathers who helped set up a government that broke away from the British government. But the thing was, he was also a pretty wealthy guy in a pretty good position and didn't like the idea that mob rule could just attack the protesters. So they definitely had a fear of mob rule. The founding fathers did, at least some of them anyway. So, yeah, committees of correspondence were created around this time as a means by which patriots could circulate letters of protest against British policies. It functioned as kind of a shadow opposition government in the run-up to the American Revolutionary War, were vital in organizing the Continental Congress, getting like-minded people to think together. That was a big, big situation. Also, if you're ever asked about the Gaspee Affair, it was a British warship commissioned to capture vessels smuggling goods before they reached the colonies. The Gaspee ran aground on the shores of Rhode Island. The Sons of Liberty set fire to the boat and then celebrated throughout coastal colonial towns as a victory for the tax-burdened consumer. So that was pretty much a big slap in the face to British rule over the colonies. The Tea Act in 1773 actually lowered the price of tea, but colonists were now wary of any British attempt to collect revenue. They refused to purchase tea in any way, so that was a big thing. But in protest, the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, dressed up as American Indians, boarded the British merchant ships and dumped their tea into the Boston harbor. It resulted in the closure of the harbor, the colonial charter of Massachusetts being revoked, and the Quartering Act. So that was, again, the act that allowed British troops to be in the homes of the colonists. A big slap in the face to the colonists done by the British as well was the 1774 Quebec Act, an act of Parliament which allowed the former French region to expand its borders, taking away potential lands from colonists in the Ohio River Valley who thought, hey, we should get this land. Even more offensive to the largely Protestant colonists, it allowed Quebec citizens to practice Catholicism freely. So that was something they just could not abide by. It was part of the Intolerable Acts. It was a colonial term for a number of punitive laws passed by the British Parliament. In response to the Boston Tea Party, these acts were the Quebec Act, the Tea Act, and the Quartering Act as well. So we're going to get to some stuff to do with the American Revolution now. And that we'll start with the Declaration and the resolves. So there was a first attempt by the First Continental Congress to reconcile the 13 colonies with the British Empire. It was addressed to King George. It urged him to correct the wrongs incurred by the colonists while simultaneously acknowledging the authority of Parliament to regulate colonial trade and commerce. So pretty much saying that, hey, guys, we know that you still need to govern us. Like, we know we are still British subjects, but some of the stuff you're pulling, it's just too much. And pretty much that letter to King George went in the garbage because the reaction really was, these colonists are making demands of us? What the hell? This is intolerable. And they quickly pretty much put an end to any hope of reconciliation. So that was one of the moves of the First Continental Congress, organized in 1774 as a response to the Intolerable Acts. Colonial leaders managed to urge their colonies to expand military reserves and organize boycotts of British goods in the meantime. Thomas Gage was a controversial British general leading the British response to the Pontiac Rebellion. He served as the governor of Massachusetts to enforce the Intolerable Acts. Not a very popular guy. He led the British forces at Lexington and Concord as well as Bunker Hill. So instrumental for the British in the first parts of the Revolutionary War. And really kind of a response to the Tea Party. Not very popular guy with especially the more patriotic-minded people in Boston. So, yeah, the American Revolution then began, where the 13 colonies threw off the yoke of the British Empire and established the United States of America. It's distinct but related to the American Revolutionary War from 1775 to 1783. So the American Revolution was a time period, a change in mindset. This is a very, very important thing to kind of understand here. It was really a time period from 1765 to 1773 of just a understanding of, hey, we cannot be loyal British subjects anymore. We have to make our own country. That time in 1775 where things began to turn into an actual war, that was the war for independence. But the mindset change was the American Revolution. So that's two different things that you really need to understand there. So the beginning of the American Revolution is traced from the aftermath of French and Indian War, when the British started taxing the colonists to make up its war debt. So, the Declaration of Causes and the Necessities of Taking Up Arms was a document published by the Continental Congress on July 6, 1775. It justified the raise of a professional colonial military force and urged King George III to, again, a second time, reconsider colonial grievances. And he dismissed attempts by the Second Continental Congress, King George did, to peacefully resolve their conflict with the Parliament on the grounds the colonies had no authority to form such a body. So he was like, they don't have any rights to govern themselves. This is ridiculous. I won't let this happen. They tried again with the Olive Branch Petition, which was a 1775 statement by the Continental Congress that reasserted colonial loyalty again to King George III and asked him to intervene with Parliament on the colony's behalf. The king refused to recognize legitimacy of any such Congress in any kind of way and make such requests. So this at the time comes Thomas Paine, the author of Common Sense, which was a pamphlet that used the Enlightenment philosophy to argue that it would be contrary to common sense to allow British injustices to continue, and things. You're pretty much saying that this is so crazy. Like, we're defying common sense by continuing to let this happen. We need a change, and we need a change now. That was his take on the matter, and it was pretty convincing, believe it or not. So, this government was founded on really some pretty big Enlightenment ideals, or at least attempted to. An 18th century Enlightenment, but just quick recap 2 years past. It was an 18th century philosophical and intellectual movement which prized reason. It challenged traditional notions of reflexive obedience to the church and to the monarchy, and laid the groundwork for scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. So, some followers of this were Ben Franklin and Thomas Paine in his common sense idea, the government of by the people, for the people. Things should be challenged, things should be changed. And of course, the French Revolution was also founded on this. But this American Revolution was really the first time that Enlightenment ideals had been able to put into practice by any of these so-called Enlightenment thinkers, or people who believed Enlightenment thinkers anyway. So a group of people who believed them were the Second Continental Congress, an assembly of delegates from across all 13 colonies now, finally. It passed the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation, so they did some pretty important things. Second Continental Congress was the one where stuff really changed and got done. Richard Henry Lee, by the way, fun fact, was the first delegate to call for a motion to declare independence. But also a member of the Continental Congresses was Thomas Jefferson. Things you need to know about him was he authored the Declaration of Independence. He was the first Secretary of State from 1779 to 1781 under George Washington, the second Vice President from 1797 through 1801, and I believe John Adams. He helped found the Democratic Republican Party in 1794 and co-authored the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which I believe we will get to later on. Now to the Declaration of Independence. It announced the colony's official break from England, making the United States a country in its own right. It contained a preamble that heavily reflected Enlightenment philosophy regarding the natural rights. So if you see any kind of question on the exam about Enlightenment ideals and the Declaration of Independence, just know those two are strongly connected. Enlightenment ideals really build the foundation of the Declaration of Independence, which is especially the preamble, which begins with the "We the People," the more perfect union, etc., etc., etc. So, it contained that kind of preamble, and also reflected 27 grievances and charges of wrongdoing directed at the Crown and Parliament. So, so the Patriots, these were activists for independence from the British Empire, mostly young New Englanders and Virginians. They often didn't have any significant status in society. Many volunteered their time to a Continental Army, typically anyway, without pay. So that's a pretty surprising thing. Benedict Arnold was a major general in the Revolutionary War. He participated in the capture of Fort Ticonderoga and the Battle of Saratoga, most infamously remembered for his defection to the British, which caused his name to be, pretty much in America anyway, be a byword for treason. Don't go Benedict Arnold on me kind of idea. So he was an American general. Horatio Gates, who we're talking about here, is also an American general. He shares credit with Benedict Arnold for winning a pretty big turning point in the war. Most important battle, widely considered, the Battle of Saratoga, which is an umbrella term really for two battles fought 18 days apart in autumn of 1777. British forces under General Burgoyne were attacked. U.S. forces led by Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold. The British were eventually forced to retreat. News of the American victory led to the introduction of French aid, reshaping the entire war. So the Whigs were a British political party that took control of the Parliament from the Tories, conservatives, and negotiated the peace terms with the colonists, distinct from the later American political party of the same name. Not the same people there. Probably be mostly asked about the Whigs. I don't think they even come up actually this period. But the Treaty of Paris, the second Treaty of Paris, this unit, or this period, the first one was 1763, to do with the French and Indian War. This one was to do with 1783, ending the Revolutionary War. The U.S. actually agreed to repay debts to British merchants and promised not to punish loyalists who chose to remain in the United States. It was also, though, a formal recognition of the United States as an independent country, setting the geographic boundaries between the British Empire and the United States. So it really was a bad treaty, but hey, at least it was a treaty. It's not like they were going through a rough one, going against the biggest power, still the biggest power in the world, but it wasn't the best look for them, this treaty there. Let's take a quick digression here to talk about the American Indians and their relationship to some of the things that went on here. They formed a Miami Confederacy, a collection of American Indian tribes in the 18th century. In the Northwest Indian War from 1785 to 95, it was a military alliance led by Little Turtle and Blue Jacket in an attempt to resist the expansion of the U.S. in the old Northwest Territory. And they had multiple battles fighting off and just more and more conflicts really in the period after the American Revolution, when the government was still trying to be set up. There was huge conflicts along the frontier between Indians and New America and their frontiersmen. yeah, again, here, a pretty important thing here, the impact of the Enlightenment was huge on the colonists as they set up their government. One of the main guys here was John Locke. He was a British philosopher whose theory of natural rights challenged the absolute and divine rule